our second thematic panel on global economy and strategic partnerships in times of war, and it's essential to advance in the understanding of international participation of countries. In this panel, we will have recent international episodes with commercial agreements and negotiation. I would like to call to the floor to start this debate Ambassador of Brazil in Germany and Counselor of Brazilian Center of International Relationships, Ambassador Roberto Jaguaribe.
Convido a palco.
I call to the floor the head of Division of South America of European Service of External Action, Veronique Lorenzo. And the Security National Council of the Federal German Parliament, Henning Speck. You are very welcome. Have an excellent panel. Good morning to all of you. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here in this event, the 20th edition. And I think it's an event that it gives a highlight to an important issue to other regions of the world. And I believe it has contributed for a better understanding on important issues here in Brazil. I would like to greet CAIX, an entity that we're great partnership with Brazil, and CEBRI. And CEBRI is an institution that is strengthening itself as one of the main centers of thinking on international relationships, not only in Brazil, Latin America, and the world, and also European Commission that has a solid relation with us. The title of our panel has been mentioned, Global Economics and Partnerships in Time of War. I know that this is a very, very comprehensive subject. The world is very complex. There are a lot of alternatives that can be dealt with this issue of partnerships. The focus of our meeting, of this event, is always Latin America and Europe relation, and therefore we will restrict ourselves to what can be understood on this dynamic regarding the crisis that have been so well dealt in the previous panels. Evidently, I will only repeat because I think it's a consensus that when we talk about this, and then I will use the words that have been created by the Chancellor of Germany, the decided gender. That means changes of times, an inflection moment for the global issues as a result, in his words, of the invasion by Russia into Ukraine, and also the climate change and all the changes that are a result of necessity or an emergency action regarding this. And finally, not a conflict, but a rivalry that is growing, covering a lot of areas between United States and China that I believe considered in very different ways. The idea that idea wants to be the owner of the world and wants to have primacy, and other people think that China wants to have their path in order to follow their destiny, and they're not allowed to. So these are different considerations, and I think this brings a conflictive situation that has a global impact that is quite important. We cannot neglect, but it has been forgotten lately, the effects of the pandemic has contributed to have relevant problems in the provision chains that have effects on this until the date, and have generated an important action regarding outsourcing of goods in other regions. The relation of Latin America and Europe has always been very strong and a reference. We have a continent that is effectively the main model that Latin America has, therefore a very, very strong relation during a period of time. Brazil with Europe and Germany specifically, I'm talking about Germany because that's where I'm an ambassador, we have a very strong relation. When I was a president of APEX, a map of investments between the European Union and Brazil that was re-edited, published again, and European Union is the greatest investor here in Latin America and in Brazil, and this is expensive for all the south cone of the region. It changes according to the northern power, because the United States has a very important role in our region towards the north. But in the south area, South America, Europe has always been predominant in investments and also in trade. Of course, there's a trend in Europe considering South America as if it were the 19th century. The European naturalists contribute to have a European image, starting with Humboldt. That was the one that defined the image of Brazil and Latin America in Germany. But South America and Latin America is much more than that. We're 660 million of inhabitants, GDP of about 11 trillion of dollars. Therefore, economic reality is very important. That has a very important power regarding Europe because of its traditional partnership. It happens that this has not been used during the last 30 years. And the great beneficiary of this lack of intention from Europe has been, of course, Asia. Everybody talks about China, but it's not only China. All Asia has been benefited of an extraordinary increase, a significant increase of participation in investments and of trade regarding Latin America. In the case of Brazil specifically, our relation with Asia, not China, is 25% greater than ours with the European Union, which is a proof of this. In part, this is due, what has been mentioned already, to the expansion to the east of the European Union. I think that's rational. Germany mainly had to give an attention specifically to this process. The first condition of diplomacy has to be, and it is necessary, geography. So if you have neighbors that are not in your level of conditions of progress and they have difficulties, it's very natural, this process. But these three crises are drawing the attention to a need to check this. And Europe has talked about approximation towards Latin America, and we have an opportunity to bring more vitality to the relationship and transform it into a central axis of a level of intensity between Europe and Latin America. And for this, we have here two panelists that will talk about their reasons. I will start with Veronique Lorenzo, the head of South American Division of External Service in Europe, and therefore she has a daily contact with this subject. She will give a presentation, followed by Henning Speck, that's a National Security Counselor by CDU in the German Parliament, and has a role always traditionally. He is a great German party. It's Volkspartei. It's the parties that represent an important group of voters of different origins, politically speaking. And now we may say that the Green Party is going to be a threat to a bipolar world of Volkspartei in Germany, but also it's an important aspect. So in first place, I will pass the floor to Veronique Lorenzo. Thank you. Good morning to all of you. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you to CEBRI for the invitation and to allow me to talk about the perspectives regarding external action of European service, starting with the diagnosis. And we know free trade and organizations are being threatened. The focus now is economical security, interventional role of the state, and we have to see the recent statement of G7 that focuses in economical security and resilience, like food resilient chains and structure critical situation, all the issues that threaten peace. And the fact is that economical security has become a central concept in the economical policies.
Sometimes that has led to direct appeals for protectionism. But before going into that debate, I'd like to go back to some important premises. Part of the European Union since its creation and the prosperity of the international union has been built on this investments in free trade and of course based on an international order based on rules. But this model obviously has allowed us to grow and allow us to have better living standards and security and stability for our citizens. Today, commerce accounts for 25% of the GDP of the European Union, 40 million jobs. And GDP is not only the commerce. Commerce is not the GDP is not just commerce. International innovation, a very important example close to us, is the cooperation between Embraer and European companies. Both of them actually have benefited greatly from innovation for both sides of the Atlantic. Currently, in this context that we see of international competition and geopolitical tensions, these interdependencies imply risks. Everybody has talked about tensions between the United States and China, the war in Ukraine, of course, and the shocks caused by COVID-19. And that has made us watch all the more. So today, the instrumentalization and economic coercion, the example of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, has exposed very clearly the vulnerabilities, economic weaknesses of the European Union that have been attributed to this excessive dependence on just one supplier of an important commodity. And Russia had no problem in instrumentalizing the supply of gas to the European Union, like using it as an economic tool. And China is still a strong, essential partner, trade partner to Europe. The economic relationship is tilted in China's favor. It's characterized by a trade deficit and distorted trade practices and strategic dependencies, and that's a big problem when we talk about raw materials that are critical to grain and digital transitions. What's important to highlight here is we're not the only ones to suffer from this vulnerability. Any region that has excessive dependency on export and import markets becomes vulnerable the same way. Therefore, our priority is to rebalance and reduce risks and search for a better equilibrium in trade and investment relations, mitigating these vulnerabilities and weaknesses and promoting transparency, predictability, and reciprocity. We've seen that these interdependencies are a source of prosperity and innovation, but they could be a challenge and a threat as well. It's mixed blessings, actually. There is a temptation in the face of so many challenges, multiple old challenges, to retract from this globalization. And we've heard a lot of talk about decoupling, and it's important today to avoid these extreme oscillations of the pendulum, because protectionism could undermine the very foundation of our prosperity, our growth, and our security. As economic links are the engine of the engagement and cooperation, the weaker integration of our economies, the bigger the threat of confrontation and conflict. Actually, what we're looking for at the European Union is to model these policies carefully, to gauge these policies carefully, and talking openly about de-risking and decoupling. There are two processes. The difference between reducing risks and engaging in decoupling for the European Union. Economic security means finding the right balance and at the same time protect As we've said before, we talked about the international order based on rules. It's what we call the strategic autonomy, open strategic autonomy, and I would like to emphasize the word open. And that happens at a time in which international cooperation, collective cooperation, becomes all the more obvious because of the challenges we face. Climate change is a case in point, and the preservation of biodiversity. These are clearly joint efforts so that we can have a positive impact, but also areas that are surfacing whose importance we're only beginning to understand, like the digital development, in particular the role of artificial intelligence. And we know that these challenges will require joint work by all countries to agree upon common rules. And for us as European Union, the goal is to build partnerships with reliable partners that share the same values as we do. What I want to say is that relations go beyond the commercial dimension, even though trade is a powerful engine. And for the European Union, the agenda is to conclude association treaties and promote investments, and to build a global gateway, actually. And for example, resource-rich countries, raw material-rich countries lead to investments in productive infrastructure and give rise to an aspiration, a legitimate aspiration, which is to add value to what they produce. The essence of these agreements is that they're mutually beneficial, transparent, and they don't aim at creating dependencies. And how does it translate in the relationship between Europe and Latin America? We've talked about our intention of revitalizing trade relations with Latin America and traditional links. They're all deep traditional links in terms of human issues and trade issues. Both regions are clear, strong advocates of the international order, and in our trade relations and investments, of course, they're healthy. And the European Union is by far the largest investor in Latin America. The European Union invests heavily in Latin America, but we need to do more. Our colleagues have talked about the bi-regional agenda, communication, and the efforts of the European Union for Latin America. We talked about the summit that's coming on in the month of June, and really we want to redimension this relationship. Within this bi-regional relation that's made up of many blocks. Two foundations are the strategic partnership with Brazil and the Mercosur agreement. Strategic partnerships with Brazil harks back to 2007. It hasn't paid justice to its name over the past few years as a strategic effort. And the effort has been, in the past few months, to revitalize through high-level visits. Presidents and commissioners would mentioned the next visit by our President von der Leyen in June, and that aim at confirming interest in various dialogues that are priorities for both parties, like, for example, on climate change and the digital development and renewable resources and international security and defense. But what currently concerns us most immediately, that's the negotiations with the Mercosur agreement. Many people think it's outdated. It's been 20 years in the making under negotiation. I believe that this is an agreement that's extremely modern, up to date, and that has to do with it answers the challenges of today's world because it goes way beyond a free trade agreement, and it offers really a framework for a political dialogue and cooperation. It is a platform of engagement, a long-term engagement in vital terms, such as the bilateral relationship with Brazil and other issues as well, such as sustainable added value chains, urban development and sustainable development, digital development. And this agreement, I believe, will be the main vehicle through which we will strengthen our relations, both trade relations and policies, and the source of many benefits for both parties. Just to give you an example, there are concerns raised by the impact of the agreement and Brazil's industrial base. But as long as it's well used, it can be a source of real development, industrial development in Brazil. According to a recent study by a colleague, Vina Souza, Brazilian exports are much more diversified relative to Chinese exports, and they have a manufacturing component that's very significant and very sophisticated products compared with the analysis of foreign direct investment. As has been mentioned before, 60% come from the European Union. 60% of FDI comes from the European Union. European Union, in fact, supports the development of modern sectors in Brazil, from vehicles to renewable energies, and that is an offer that brings with it, that would bring with it the innovations and technology for the country. I think that we are currently in a critical phase of our discussions. There is a window of opportunity now, a window of opportunity. There is political will to conclude this. It's been confirmed by the latest negotiations in Buenos Aires to solve pending issues. We're aware of the concerns on the part of Mercosur in the agricultural sector, because the autonomous legislation, above all the Green Pact of the European Union. But I think that through dialogue and political will, these sources of friction will be ironed out without reopening the agreement, which is important, and drawing upon the window of opportunity that we have right now. We need to look not only at the benefits, but also analyze the costs of the non-agreement, if you will, the political cost of not signing the agreement, in terms of credibility of the European Union and Mercosur as well, and of course the opportunity costs, economically speaking, by not signing the agreement. Everybody has their eyes on closing the deal, on the fine print of the agreement, but I think that we need to take a step back and not lose sight of the big picture, the global picture, because this agreement is what we will rule over, and they will provide the framework for our relations in the coming next 20 years. And in this geopolitical context, I think that's the most important part of it. But instead of not working on green development or value-added chains, green value, if you will, green economies, I'd like to wrap up by mentioning our dear former ambassador, Marcos Galvão, former ambassador to the European Union, that said the following in one of the sessions at the European Parliament: neither Brazil nor the European Union, we're not the Lion King and the forest of trade, but if we're bent on working together, we can make a big difference. Thank you so much. Very well. I'll now give the floor to Henning Speck, please. Muito obrigado.
Sorry, I'm still the only one who's not speaking Portuguese on this panel now, but first of all, let me thank the organizers, CEBRI, and the EU for inviting me once again. It's great to be among friends and be part of this very, very important discussion. And just to start off, I would say that Fauci has always been very visionary. It's always provided a platform to engage in this dialogue between Latin America and the EU. And I think politics is only now again picking up the baton and focusing more, as Enrique Mora has said this morning. It is great that we're going to have a new joint communication, an EU CELAC summit, and maybe it all comes a little bit late, but it's good that we pick up and possibly transfer the spirit of Foci to our conversations back in Europe. The topic, and Roberto has already mentioned that, is quite far. So we have to pick a couple of elements and observations that we might discuss with you all during this panel. And I think looking at the economics and the outlook of the world, it shows very clearly the differences between the two regions, but at the same time sheds light on the huge opportunities that still exist, among others with the agreement that we hopefully managed to finalize. So let me just start by picking up on a few observations from a European and from a German angle. I think we've thoroughly discussed that we have an immediate challenge, and that is Russia's war against Ukraine and the repercussions on the global order. And a lot has been said by Benedetta and others before, but I would like to mention and add one point because I think it is extremely important when it comes to maintaining the global order. Ukraine has deliberately given up nuclear weapons. That was part of the Budapest Memorandum. And in exchange, they obtained a guarantee for territorial integrity. And Russia just ripped off that piece of paper and threw it to the trash can, to be honest. And you can all imagine what that means for the validity and credibility of an international order. So look at the Iran negotiations and other parts where dealing with exactly that challenge. This is why we so desperately defend the global order in Europe and want the former order to be reestablished. This is why we are supplying Ukraine to the extent we can in order that they prevail in this war. And this is where the international global ramifications of what's going on in the heart of Europe lie. Looking at the response, there's of course military support, but a severe set of sanctions. And that is something that Europe has embarked in the past years, I would say, as an instrument to ensure the respect for the international order and sanction a breach of international law. The problem with the sanctions, and that was part of the discussion, is that it is only being accepted and implemented by a limited number of countries in the world. And there are many, including friends in Latin America, who see the dynamics and the world differently and do not implement those sanctions, obviously weakening the leverage that we have and creating space for circumvention of sanctions. So this is something we have to discuss with our friends. And then we have immediate challenges and above that, and a lot has been said about China. Let me add a little different perspective, because in the former panels it was often put into the context of a US-China rivalry and systemic competition. I don't want to discount that there are elements of that, but at the end of the day, I would draw the line differently and not portray us as a bystander and someone who's looking from the outside. But at the end of the day, the rivalry is between those countries who want to maintain and strengthen the existing rules-based international order and those countries who want to alter it and possibly create a new international order, which has ramifications for all of us. And I would draw the line to trade and sort of to the second part of this of the topic of this panel. Trade can be a source of stability, of reliability, and of peace at the end of the day. This is what, and Veronique has alluded to that, this is the pillar of Europe's history. Everything that we did in Europe post-World War II is a project of economic integration with the final creation of the single market. And this has been a huge benefit for peace. And this is something we try to open up to others as well. This is one of the fundamental offers that we make to the Western Balkans, for example, also in order to stabilize the countries and provide peace and stability, something that is so needed if we look at the recent conflicts between Serbia and Kosovo, for example. So there is huge potential. But on the other hand, trade can be misused in political sense. And this is something that we worry about with creating singular dependencies, especially by China in the recent past. And I think there's evidence that we don't only have a theoretical debate about that, but let us look at the clear examples that we had. Lithuania, a point in case. We have a former fellow member of the European Parliament who will speak later. Lithuania suffered severely from Chinese economic aggression. We have Australia, we have Norway, countries that have been punished economically, with China from one day to the other deciding not to import certain products anymore as a means of exercising political leverage. So this is not a theoretical discussion we are having. It's a very concrete one, and it should open all of our eyes not to run into the risk of this singular dependency. We, and I speak as a German, are highly dependent in certain branches, and we are just embarking on a new strategy, Veronique rightly said, of de-risking, of diversifying trading partners, diversifying value chains. And this is one element that now brings us closer to Latin America again. I think from both challenges, the war of aggression against Ukraine and Chinese increasing aggression in international economic terms as well, there's high time for diversification of partners. And the European Union is looking at those that are close to us in terms of values, in terms of history, and in terms of potential. And that is why we're looking specifically at enhancing our relations with the whole area of Latin America. A finalization of the EU-Mercosur agreement would be the single most visible piece and create the largest trading zone in the world. I mean, everyone can say what that would matter, not only in terms of bi-regional trade, but in terms of setting standards and setting the games of the rule. And Veronique has already pointed out that the real idea is to have a forward-looking, future-oriented trade agreement that first and foremost provides innovation, scientific cooperation, so to embark on value added of the 21st century, where both areas can deeply profit from. And I want to end by just adding that we should not stop at the trade and economic angle. At the end of the day, what we want to achieve is a much, much more mature and much closer political partnership in that sense, that we build upon this trade agreement. And I think highest level coordination on all those topics that make up the global and international order. We've been talking about human rights, democracy, freedom of speech, liberty of the press. All that is at peril. And only together we will ensure that we can uphold those values that are pivotal and constitutional for our countries at the end of the day. I'll stop it there, and I'm very happy to engage in the conversation. Thank you.
Eu agradeço as apresentações muito importantes, mas eu vou cumprir aqui um papel adicional na ausência de um debatedor brasileiro, para dar uma perspectiva um pouco da nossa região a respeito dessa matéria. Desde logo, não há grandes divergências, porque o Brasil realmente quer muito mais Europa. Está muito interessado em articular uma relação exponenciada do que já existe hoje, e estamos trabalhando nesse sentido há muito tempo. Não estamos encontrando eco, mas agora é uma oportunidade que se afigura como extremamente promissora vocês todos sabem, mas eu vou repetir, nós estamos num sistema de visitas internacionais já inédito, mesmo no caso de presidências como a do presidente Lula, ativa na área internacional. O que nós estamos encontrando esse ano é totalmente inédito. No caso da Alemanha, em particular, nós tivemos a visita do presidente da Alemanha, do chanceler da Alemanha, do vice-chanceler da Alemanha, todos acompanhados de ministros muito importantes. Teremos a visita agora da ministra das Relações da Alemanha, acompanhada do ministro do Trabalho da Alemanha, já veio a ministra do Meio Ambiente da Alemanha, já veio a ministra de Cooperação Internacional da Alemanha, e ainda virá, até o fim desse semestre, o ministro-chefe da Casa Civil alemã.
And also another one that has an important role, general articulation of the government, and it's a person of direct and total trust of our government. So this is an interest. Are we taking a level of relationship has much stronger in the past and has decreased a lot during the last 30 years. I think it's important, however, to correct some distortions that have given part to the difficult establishing a new level of relation. And it has to do mainly with we have other subjects, but in the case of Brazil, it's the environmental issue. In some of Brazil goes through difficulties mainly in the control of the deforestation of the Atlantic forest that started last year. And it's also, we can see that we have a very clear commitment regarding this subject, that the last experience of President Lula was very successful. There was a reduction of 80% of deforestation, and there was an increase of the agriculture products in 75%, and this requires a lot of resources, a lot of efforts, and to which international community at the end is not very well prepared for. And one of the distortions that I think is important to mention, that in spite of Europe being one of the great mobilizers in the sense of working to avoid that climate change will have a negative impacts, but has the power of reaching it in a worse way. I think that Latin America and Brazil, mainly speaking, are countries with an excess, I'm not going to say excess, no, that's not the right word, with a lot of sustainability. We have an energy matrix today is one that Europe intends to have in 20 years' time. And Brazil, in terms of forests, is where Europe was 2,000 years ago and cannot go back to that and doesn't intend to go back to that. So the real situation is a different level. The additional capacity sustainable energy generation in Latin America has, and not only Brazil, although Brazil may be one of the highlighted countries, is key to this new partnership can be achieved. Europe has a requirement to import sustainable energy. It's focused now in a great increase of sustainable energy production, but even so, we all know that it would not be sufficient to face the demands, and it would be, you will try to find in the world these kind of energies, and Latin America is considered as one of the more promising places for this. Mainly South America, other areas also have this power or possibility. We have an extraordinary interest in this and our capacity to have an active production. In the case of Brazil, we have feasible projects not held yet because of lack of demand of 230 gigawatts of renewable energy in the northeast of the country that has a capacity production and storage, not yet, but it's able to have, but transportation to Europe is quite easy. One of the problems that we find has to do with relationship with China. The fact that Latin America is an area where China has arrived very convinced and has generated a very important trade, because China is the greatest partner of a great number of countries of the region, including Brazil. It brings some kind of concern, and I think it's natural to have this. The fact that China has already entered into Africa and brought a great change in the trade relations with Africa has brought to Europe an important answer to this, and it also provokes here. What I want to say about this is the following. Brazil has the privilege of having a diplomatic vocation, has the capability also of having a conversation with other countries in the world. And our conversations with China is based in common interests, is common in economical complementarity, and China is the greatest economy in the world with a purchase power as of 2015, 2016, but it's an economy very far from self-sufficiency. It has external demands that are very important, above all in years where Brazil is great and a greater producer: energy, raw material, and agriculture. So these are three elements where China has an important demand. This relation is a great strength for trade, and it won't change because its demand has to be achieved. So what we are able to do is to accelerate this relation with the European Union and with the countries here also. But the idea that it's necessary to have an option, and I don't think this option would be from Europe, but let's not hinder Brazil. I think Brazil is a country that has this facility, that has a vocation that's quite universal in terms of relationships. And I think that a relation with China has to be considered. Brazil doesn't see China with this concern that was mentioned by you, for example. I think it's evident that any partnership is based on a limit regarding the percentage of its trade, and it has difficulties of economical nature, and we see our neighbors in the United States, how many times they have conflict situation with Mexico and Canada regarding a variation like recently happened in external policy in North America. Brazil is a great economy, but we have a foreign trade that's quite balanced, and China, that is our greatest partner, has 34% of our total trade. So there's something that is not still in the level that it could be extremely concerning. But I think that these issues should be considered, and the Brazilian interest and the rest of Latin America in increasing very much the relation with Europe is not connected to some conditioning of political issues, although these are such, and the challenges are important because of democracies where other countries of the region, and Brazil recently also in a very critical episode that happened on January 8th. But now, at the moment, Peru, Ecuador are facing highly important challenges as well, and cooperation with Europe can bring benefits in this sense as well. So I think it's an issue that we should see with a lot of interest and a lot of energy and willingness to make it happen, and not only be regional relationship, Mercosur and European Union, but also bilateral Brazil, Germany, that grace important power. I would like to ask two questions. First of all, the recovery of the interest of the agreement Mercosur and European Union, and the feasibility that it could become concluded or advanced until the end of this year, as has been presented in many important meetings and recently in the visit of the Chancellor of Germany from Brazil, and also being discussed regarding the favorable approach of the President of Mercosur and European Union that will pass now in the second semester to Spain, one of the main supporters of this agreement. Here in Brazil, they ask me a lot if it's realistic, this optimism that we're talking about now. We're facing a person that's sitting directly in Brussels in this subject. I would like to ask for you to tell us that you truly believe there's a concrete possibility for this to be a fact, a real fact in this second semester of this year.
Vou responder. Muito obrigada.
Thank you. It's a key question, and all our attention is really in the conclusion of this agreement. Let's go a little bit backwards. We ended, technically speaking, the agreement of Mercosur has two parts. There has a trade part and it's a pillar that we call politics and cooperation. The trade pillar was ended technically in 2019. Politics and cooperation was ended in June of 2020. So we couldn't go further on because there were a lot of concerns in Europe by the European Parliament and member states regarding sustainability issues. Because of this, we agreed on our part, the Vice President of Ambrosky, he committed himself to issue an additional instrument that would detail everything that's in the agreement and would detail also numbers, mainly sustainability, environment, and deforestation. We took some time to deliver this regarding Mercosur, and this was delivered finally in March of this year. And our partners say, you took long, you took more than 2 years to deliver this document, so now be patient. We need time to review it. Okay, I think it's understandable. And we have this goodwill and patience on our side. So we're waiting to have a reaction from Mercosur regarding this proposal that is not in position. It's a text that has been negotiated, and I believe that we won't have many differences. Another problem that was mentioned on Mercosur's side, as has been mentioned, all the autonomous legislation of the European Union regarding green subjects of the carbon rate, the deforestation products free of deforestation, and it makes that this new legislation will change the balance that was reached when we reached the agreement, Mercosur. So what we have to consider now is to have more dialogue. Of course, we have similar goals regarding deforestation, and what really matters is how will we implement this legislation, and therefore there is an offer also of cooperation and a follow-up. The sections, mainly the small and middle-sized companies, to adjust themselves to this legislation. Once again, this is a conversation that could be solved if there is, of course, always if there is a political will and a long-term view. And I continue believing that 2023 may be the year of the political conclusion of this. Thank you. You told me that you remember the sanctions, the political convergencies being an important details of the future view of the alignment of Europe.
That creates embarrassments as a result of some past experiences lived by some European countries and other countries as well in their relationship with China, their trade relations with China. The question is there in Europe and in the U.S. follow-up work on measures towards containing exports through different strategies? In the case of Germany and Europe, there's been a creation of a production chain control, which creates potential hurdles that are quite relevant. My question is, has to do with the combination of these elements. Will Europe create, let's say, limits on political convergence within its commercial interests on its trade issues? Will there be a point in which, beyond which, it won't be possible to stretch the road vis-a-vis these issues? What's going to be the relationship with China like? What's it going to be like in the context of necessary convergences, so there will be a foundation for reliable production chains in the future?
First of all, of course, I would never compare China with how we look at trade with Latin America. So it's a different, totally different comparison. Veronique rightly said at the very beginning that the notion of economic security is something we're heavily debating in Europe, because we've seen in the recent decades that critical technologies have been transferred, especially to China, and it has been an unfair trade. I mean, China is a state-driven economy in wide parts and not part of a free market economy. So it's not up to businesses to decide what they want to transfer and how they want to protect their technology, but it's very often sort of decided by the Communist Party and their institutions. So this is why we have to look at it and make sure that if we can't guarantee a level playing field, otherwise we have to use these trade instruments in order to somewhat make sure that we get a level playing field with regards to China. I would see it totally different with regards to Latin America with that case. So I don't see a necessity now to put a kind of politically inflicted limitations to trade. Quite to the opposite. I think the very philosophy of the EU Mercosur agreement is one of mutual prosperity and mutual innovation and shared opportunities. I think one direction that trade, looking from a European perspective, is going to, and this does not only go for Latin America, it goes for other regions of the world too, and Africa and Asia, is that more of the value addition of the production process has to be created in the other parts of the world, not in Europe. So we have to make sure, especially if we look at Africa, that value addition is being created, that raw materials are being refined in the countries and not just sent to Europe or sent to the US or other parts. So I think this is mandatory to look at, and this is where politics has to come in to assure that. But again, I don't see politically inflicted limitation. The one thing I would say, and I can say that sort of from the opposition now and being self-critical, I think we have to take steps within the European Union to be more open in some fields. Agriculture is one of them, right? So in the future, I think looking at those, we have to get up. But I know the difficult internal discussions we have, even in our ranks.
Well, muito obrigado, viu?
Thank you so much. I have time. I think we have time for 2 extra questions from the audience. I have one right here in the first row. Thank you so much, Guillermo Valles, Ambassador of Uruguay to Brazil. I'm not going to talk about as Ambassador of Uruguay to Brazil, but rather as a former Ambassador of Uruguay to the European Union. When we began these negotiations, these conversations, I was the ambassador, had the great honor of being the Uruguayan ambassador to the EU when it was still a European community. It's primitive. It's been years, 1997 all the way to 2000. With our dear Jorge Dahlstrom, we set the engine in motion to talk about our agreement with Ambassador Dahlstrom. I was also Vice Chancellor when we began to negotiate in 2000, in the year 2000, 1999 and 2000. I would like to stress, to emphasize, I'm going to switch to Spanish if you will allow me. I would like to emphasize 2 important points. Veronique has talked to us about costs, opportunity costs. Opportunity costs. What does it mean to lose, and how much would it be worth losing? And this opportunity of signing, to sign, not moving it forward, but to sign the European Union Mercosur Treaty this year. That's the first issue. To Mercosur, we must not keep calling into question the grain pact or the grain agreement. I am a trade negotiator. I've been a trade negotiator for 40 years. All I know is that the grain pact will remain. So the question is, we should ask ourselves, do we want to uphold the grain pact, but through an agreement between the European Union and Mercosur, which will make it possible, as Speck was saying, to have platforms and roads with which to continue looking into ways whereby our commerce, our trade could find the proper routes, because the Green Pact will be upheld. So we have one chance: the Green Pact and no agreement, or and having a Green Pact and the agreement. It's about building opportunities. Also, I'd like to say to the European Union, our markets, our exports, all the way when we began 25 years ago, they have other destinations right now. The strategic importance, trade importance, and economic importance of the European Union in relative terms has been declining. So this cost, opportunity cost, from the point of view merely economic perspective, must be taken into account with realism by the European Union. Third point, Mr. Ambassador, and the last one, I've been a trade negotiator for 40 years, but please, in this re-evaluation that we're making right now of the agreement, the most important thing is not the trade component. The great news for the world, the great news, Ambassador, Cousin Day, for Brazil, and the prestige of Brazil, and the importance of Brazil, and for the dialogues engaged in by Brazil and the world, would be in 2024 will find us in the perfect storm.
With an agreement between Mercosur and the EU, the only way to start changing that perfect storm.
Very
well. I think that with these remarks, I think they were very well put. We can actually bring our panel to a close. This was not a question, it was a remark, a very pertinent remark, very necessary remark. We fully agree with you on that. But the truth is that we still have some work ahead. Our work has been carved out for us. In my opinion, we let it go by for a long time, and it's been a political hurdle to the approval of the agreement. It should be simpler, but it's not. I would like to thank particularly our two panelists for their wonderful insights. Thank you so much. Thank you, dear panelists. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, our audience. I'd like to remind you that tomorrow we'll carry on with two more panels, very interesting panels and important panels on the topics of artificial intelligence and systemic rivalries. Please don't forget to bring your badges so that you will have access to the Museum of Tomorrow. So see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Brasilia time and 2 p.m. Brussels time. Thank you so much.